Hey, boys and girls. Mrs. Pearson's reading to you again, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it better. I'm about to go to bed. I'm in my bed right now, and thought I'd read you guys a nighttime story, kind of like it's nap time for you, or rest time, I mean. So, chapter 10. Let's see. The last thing that happened was the four littles dashed under the radiator and through the trap door. Because there was a cat. Let's see what happens in chapter 10. Mrs. Little and Granny Little were still in the living room when the other littles hurried in. "Lucy," said Mrs. Little, "I thought you were in your room. What happened, Will? Why is Lucy with you?" Mr. Little told his wife what had happened. "Lucky for us, Lucy decided to follow me when she did," he said. "I still can't believe it. She attacked that huge cat." He shook his head. "It's amazing," said Uncle Pete. "Absolutely amazing." "We were pinned under the logs, Mother," said Tom. "I never got a chance to shoot my bow and arrows." "What are we going to do about the cat?" said Uncle Pete. "Never thought they'd get a cat to chase the mice." "We're safe inside the walls, at least," said Mr. Little. "That monster won't be able to get us here." "There's the problem of getting supplies," said Uncle Pete. "We'll have to leave the walls for that." "I think I know how we can get rid of the cat," said Mr. Little. "How?" said all the littles. "By getting it into trouble," said Mr. Little. "We can pull down the curtains for one thing. The Newcombs will blame it on the cat. We can keep spilling its milk. At night we can make loud cat noises to keep the Newcombs awake. We can even knock over lamps so that they will think the cat did it. Pretty soon the Newcombs will think they have the wrong kind of cat. They'll want to get rid of it." Everybody agreed that Mr. Little's plan was a good one. During the next few weeks, the Newcombs came to believe their cat was clumsy and noisy. One day the cat seemed to knock over a lamp. Another time, the Newcombs were awake half the night listening to meowing. It was really the littles making a terrible racket. The day after that, the curtains in the dining room were pulled down. "What do we do tomorrow, Dad?" asked Tom. "May I spill the cat's milk?" "That's good, yes," said Mr. Little. "It should be done 2 or 3 times in a row, though. Then Mr. Newcomb will get awfully tired of cleaning it up." "There's only one thing wrong with this plan, Will," said Mrs. Little. "I don't know why you say that," said Mr. Little. "Everything has worked perfectly so far. What's wrong with the plan?" "The cat is still in the house," said Mrs. Little. "Don't worry," said Mr. Little. "It won't be here long." "Mrs. Newcomb must be mad as a wet hen by now," said Uncle Pete. The next day, Tom had a close call. Just as he was lifting the cat's milk dish to spill it for the 3rd time, the cat showed up. The huge animal came bounding toward Tom. At the last moment, Tom upset the milk dish under the cat's nose. That stopped the cat long enough for Tom to get away. "This plan of yours is too slow, Will," said Uncle Pete. "We're going to have to do something else before that cat gets one of us." "What can we do?" said Mr. Little. "We need larger weapons," said Uncle Pete. I don't know if that's the answer, Uncle Pete," said Mr. Little. "Besides, that takes time, too. You're right, though. This plan isn't working. I heard Mrs. Newcomb telling Mr. Newcomb not to get rid of the cat. She's afraid the mice will return. And she likes the cat," Mr. Little went on. "Thinks it's cute. She says it's high-spirited." "Not only that," said Mrs. Little. "We can't break up everything in the house just to get rid of the cat. It's the big's house, after all." "Why don't we try taming the cat?" said Tom. "What?" said Uncle Pete. "Let's see if we can tame it," repeated Tom. "Cats have been friends to men since the early days of history." Uncle Pete looked from Mrs. Little to Mr. Little. "Do you hear what the boy is saying?" he said. "He's gone soft in the head." "No kidding, Dad," said Tom. "It's true. The early Egyptians thought cats were gods. They had them all over the place." "They did they?" said Uncle Pete. "Where did you hear such nonsense?" "I read it in one of the big history books," said Tom. Uncle Pete snorted. "A cat has never been a friend to a little, I can tell you that." "Maybe that's because none of them ever tried to tame a cat," said Tom. "They were always afraid of cats." "What kind of silly talk is that, boy?" said Uncle Pete. "Look at the size of the beast. Who could tame such a monster?" "Men tame elephants," said Tom. "Tom has an interesting idea," said Mr. Little. "Perhaps we worried too much about the size of the cat. Because we're so small, we've always thought all large animals were our enemies. Maybe that's wrong. I don't like the way this talk is going, said Uncle Pete. It's against everything we littles believe. Making friends with a cat is like making friends with a rattlesnake. Tom is saying it's not the same thing, said Mr. Little. Cats are friendly to men. Rattlesnakes are not. None of the Littles spoke. Now we may be little, said Mr. Little, but we are men. Of course we are, said Uncle Pete. He looked sideways at his tail. We're not animals. Then why can't we have a cat around the house, just like other people? Of all the silly ideas, said Uncle Pete. Oh dear, said Mrs. Little. It sounds all right, but I don't know. Why, it's a wonderful idea, said Granny Little. It's so simple. Simple-minded, said Uncle Pete. Why didn't someone think of it before, said Granny Little. Because it's a cuckoo idea, that's why, said Uncle Pete. Now see here, Peter Little, said Granny Little. Mind your manners. She stood up. Her ball of knitting yarn fell from her lap. It rolled between Mr. Little's feet. I've lived a few more days than you have, and I know a few more things than you do, too. Mr. Little picked up the ball of yarn. He tossed it gently in the air a few times. We could start taming the cat by giving her a present. Show her we mean to be friendly. Give her something to play with, said Tom. How about that ball of yarn your father is fiddling with, said Granny Little. Don't cats like to play with things like that? As a matter of fact, Granny, they do, said Mr. Little. Will that make her friendly, said Mrs. Little. It might help, said Mr. Little. We could roll a ball of yarn at the cat and see what happens. All we have to do is make sure we have room to get out of the way if she doesn't get the idea. I'm against it, said Uncle Pete. Too dangerous. Cats are cats. You can't change 'em. There's a large ball of yarn in Mrs. Big's sewing basket, said Lucy. I lifted it once. It's lighter than anything. Let's get it, said Mr. Little. I think it's worth trying. He looked at Uncle Pete. That is, if no one else has any better ideas. Count me out, said Uncle Pete. I'll stay here and sharpen my sword. So, what do you think? Is it going to work? Are they going to be able to tame the cat? Or is the cat going to try to hunt them down? We'll see tomorrow.